Hello and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I thought it'd be fun to redo a challenge that I did on my Bookstagram last year and talk about the series that I haven't finished yet, but to add a little bit of extra spice to it, let's also talk about series that I'm never gonna finish. The first series I wanted to talk about today was the Jacksonville Ray series. These are hockey romances, and I've read the first book, Pucking Around, and the second book, Pucking Wild, but I've yet to read the third book that came out last year, Pucking Sweet. This is a series that I plan on finishing. I haven't gotten around to it yet. I listened to both of them on Audible, and I gave both of them 4 stars. One series that I'm planning on not finishing is the Bunker series. I read the first book, Wake Me After the Apocalypse, as my W pick for the alphabet challenge that I was doing that year. This one is a YA book, which I don't read a lot of anymore, but in this book, there's an asteroid that's on its way to hit the Earth, and it's twice the size of the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. So to ensure the survival of the human race, a few select people are selected to be put into a cryogenic sleep for 200 years, which is about the time that scientists are predicting it'll take for everything to return back to normal and for the world to be inhabitable again. The only problem is that our main character, Joanna, is the only person that wakes up on time. It wasn't a bad book by any means. It just wasn't really for me. It didn't really keep my interest enough for me to want to keep reading. There's 2 more books in this series. I used to really enjoy post-apocalyptic type books, but I think I've just kind of stopped reading those. So this one wasn't bad. I gave it 3 stars, but I won't be continuing the series. A series that I 100% will be continuing is the Housemaid series by Frida McFadden. If you found me here from my Bookstagram, you know that I love Frida McFadden. And the first book in this series, The Housemaid, is actually one of the first books I ever read by her. I gave both the first one, The Housemaid, and then the second one, The Housemaid's Secret, 4 stars. And then I plan on eventually reading the third book, which is The Housemaid's Secret. And then Frida McFadden, she also released a novella in the same series that's meant to be read in between the second and the third book, that's called The Housemaid's Wedding, which I do plan on reading eventually. Another series that I don't think I'll be continuing is the Trial of Apollo series. I loved the Percy Jackson series, and then even more so loved the Heroes of Olympus, which is the spin-off that takes place immediately after the Percy Jackson series. So I was really excited when I finished that, and I found out that the Trial of Apollo series starts pretty much right after the last book in the Heroes of Olympus. But after reading the first book, I felt like this series just didn't have the same feeling as the first 2 series, so I ended up DNFing the second book about 50 pages in or so, and at this time, this is a series I don't really plan on continuing. A series that I will be finishing, but I'm waiting until later this year for the third book to be released, is the Assistant to the Villain series. I read the first one in 2023, and it's a little bit outside of my comfort zone. I'm not usually someone who reads a lot of fantasy, but I thought this one was cute. It was kind of goofy, just easy and fun to read, and I meant to pick up the second book when it came out last year, but I just never quite got around to it. But then I saw that there's going to be a third book, and that's going to be coming out later this year, so I'm thinking I'm going to wait until that one comes out so that then I can just get both of them and then just binge read. The next series I wanted to talk about was one that I loved the first book. I gave it 5 stars. I flew through the first book. I thought it was so good. But then I started reading the second book and I was so bored. I just completely lost interest, and I don't think I'm going to continue reading the series. Is the Inheritance Scheme series. I know a lot of people really enjoy this series, and I loved the first book, so I was really excited to keep reading. But about 60 pages into the second book, I was just so bored that I ended up DNFing, and I don't think I'm going to continue with the series at this time. Jumping back to a series that I will eventually be finishing is the Empyrean series, also known as Fourth Wing. I read Fourth Wing last year, which was a little bit late to the game, but I absolutely loved it. I thought it was so good. 5-star read for me. As someone who's not a big fan of fantasy, this one I really enjoyed. I thought it was funny, but it was also serious. It had me laughing. It had me tearing up at certain parts. Like, it was a super, super good book. And then I actually already own the second book, Iron Flame. I just haven't read it yet because right after I finished reading Fourth Wing, but before I started Iron Wing, I saw someone online say that it ends in a cliffhanger, and then I saw that there's supposed to be 5 books in this series. I hate reading series that aren't completed yet because I just want to read it all in one go. So part of me is kind of tempted to wait until all 5 books are out so that then I can just binge read all of it. But I also know that the 3rd book is coming out a little bit later this month. I think it's in like a week or so. And I have a feeling I might get a little bit of FOMO when I see everyone talking about it. So I might end up picking up the 3rd one and then read and then just be sad waiting for the next 2 books to come out. But I might also just wait until they're all out so I can just read the full series. But eventually, I will finish this one. Another author that, if you've been following my Bookstagram, you know that I absolutely love is Megan Quinn. I just love her writing. It's so easy and so fun to follow. And a series that I definitely will eventually be finishing is the Vancouver Agitator series. This series is another hockey romance, and each book is about a different player on the team. I think it's a little funny how I read a lot of hockey romances for some reason. I've never seen an actual game of hockey before, nor do I really plan on ever going to one. I'm not really a big sports fan, but for some reason, I read a lot of hockey romances. But I've loved this series. I've read the first 4 books, and the 5th book came out last year, and I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but eventually I will be finishing this one. This next series is one that's made me realize that I think I'm just a little too old to be reading young adult books. I just think that I just am not really interested in them anymore, and that series is Crave. I've heard a lot of people say a lot of great things about this series, and the covers looked really cool. A lot of the books also have sprayed edges, which is really fun. And I read the first book, and it was okay. It was a little goofy, kind of childish, but again, it's a YA book, so you're kind of getting into that. And sometimes it's nice to read something that's just goofy and a good little escape from the scariness of real life. But I picked up the second one and I started reading it, and I was really confused. It seems like there was just a big chunk that I feel like I was missing, like another book. And it was just really confusing and it was kind of boring. And so I ended up DNFing it, I think about 50 pages in or so. And I just don't think that I'm going to continue reading the series. This next series, however, made me start to wonder if maybe I do kind of like fantasy, but instead of physically reading it, maybe I should listen to it instead. And that series is the Lord of the Rings series. I listened to The Hobbit and the first 2 books last year on Audible. The versions that I was listening to for The Hobbit and the first 2 books were narrated by Andy Serkis, who is the actor who played Gollum in the movies, and he did a phenomenal job narrating these books. It just blows my mind, all the different voices that he does for all the different characters. He's singing the songs, he's yelling, he's whispering, he's like talking slowly and elongating his words when he's like narrating the Ents. And it was just such an immersive experience, and I just love these so much. The only thing is they're just really, really long. The Hobbit wasn't too bad. I think that one was only about 10 hours. But The Fellowship of the Ring was around 23 hours, and then The Two Towers was about 22 hours. And then the last one, which I haven't listened to yet, Return of the King, is about 21 hours. So they're just really long audiobooks. They're totally worth it. So eventually I'll get around to listening to the last one, because they are absolutely amazing, but I just haven't quite listened to it yet. Another series that I do want to continue, but again, I'm purposely waiting to continue reading, is the Lakefront Billionaire series. I read the first one last year. I actually discovered Lauren Asher last year, and I really enjoy her writing. There's been one book that I wasn't a big fan of, but other than that, everything else I've read by her, I've absolutely loved. And so the first book in this series was Love Redesigned, and I gave that one 4 stars. And last year, the second book came out, and I meant to pick it up, but I just hadn't gotten around to it. And then I saw that the 3rd book is coming out, I believe this May. So I'm thinking I'm going to wait until then, pick up both of them, and then I can binge read again. The final series I wanted to talk about today was the Slammed series by Colleen Hoover. I know she can be a bit of a polarizing author, and I think that personally I'm just not a big fan of her writing. The first book I ever read by her was Verity, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was a super good book. I gave that 5 stars. But every other book I've read by her just hasn't had that same pizzazz and just hasn't really lived up to the hype of that one. And so for this one, it wasn't bad. I felt like the main character, Lakin, was really immature, which, I mean, she is 17, but I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of that one. And I felt like the first book wrapped things up pretty well. So I was surprised to see that there was two more books for the series. And I just am not really interested enough in continuing reading. I felt like the first one kind of fully encompassed the story. So that's another one that I will not be finishing. Alrighty, so that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Have you read any of these books? Do you agree or disagree with the ones that I am going to finish, the ones that I'm not going to finish? For the ones specifically that I said I'm not going to finish, do you feel like I absolutely need to? Have you read any of the series that I'm planning on finishing? If so, spoiler free, what did you think about them? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I post videos twice a month, and I'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Bye.